there guys, welcome to FP1. And now, over the last couple of weeks, the main focus, of course, has been on Formula 1. The fact that Formula 1 is finally back. But I thought it'd be good today to kind of take a step back from that and look at the road to Formula 1. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by British Formula 3 racer Bart Horsten. Bart, absolutely amazing to have you on the show. Firstly, how are you? And how's your lockdown been?
No, I'm great. Thanks for asking. Lockdown's been, I guess, in some ways a bit annoying because it delayed the season. And so when you've been doing all your preparation and things like that, it can be a little bit deterring having that delayed, especially when, you really want to get back in the car. But honestly, I think for a lot of people in my position, it's been a lot more fun than majority of people. And I've fortunately been able to enjoy this time and get a lot out of it.
Fantastic. Of course, you'll be driving for Lanan Racing, if I'm right on that one, in Formula 3 this year, which starts on the 1st of August, so that'd be very exciting to watch. We've seen quite a lot of drivers go to sim racing over the course of this lockdown to keep themselves busy. Have you been doing that as well, or how have you been preparing?
Yeah, I've done a lot. I've been doing sim racing quite a bit in terms of I got invited to a few bigger competitions as well as just doing private leagues with other drivers and stuff like that for just sharpening your skills. And it's been good. It's been really, more than anything, it's just been good having something to sink your teeth into and kind of focus on and get excited about, get competitive with other drivers. Even if it's not the same as real life, it's still, it's been really good to just have something to look forward to in the weeks between getting back in the real car.
Fantastic. So, you obviously started off in karting over in Australia, then moved to the UK. Was it about 2 years ago? Is that right?
Yeah, I moved over to the UK last February.
Nice. How have you found it so far?
Different, surprisingly. Even though you'd think Australia wouldn't be that different from the UK, I think maybe just considering which part of Australia I came from, the west side in Perth, compared to living in the UK, it's actually quite a different landscape and culture, I would say. But I think the best thing is just the motorsport, just the huge amount of options you have in all the series and the tracks, and just this constant atmosphere that you don't get, especially where I'm from, where there's only one track for miles and miles and miles, and only really club level racing. And you come here and there's just so many national level series and European events, and I've just really enjoyed being immersed in that motorsport arena.
Fantastic. Well, I hope we've been treating you well in the UK. So where I want to kind of start is go back before that. What kind of got you into racing in the first place? You've got to start really, really young to kind of make it to the top level, and you've done that. So what was that, I guess, initial inspiration that kind of got you thinking, this is what I want to do?
I think I enjoyed it more as a fan initially. I was go-karting pretty young, not as young as a lot of kids start now, but I was go-karting when I was about 8 or 9 years old, so still young. But before that, I just enjoyed, I think, cars and just racing in general, and Formula 1 specifically. From a young age, I was watching that just because my dad happened to watch it. He wasn't a massive fan, but he watched Formula 1, and I think that just something about it kind of stuck with me, and I couldn't get my eyes away from any kind of racing, and I think that just kind of took off from there. And then when I was old enough to get in a go-kart, I bugged my parents so I could do that, and I think it's just been one step at a time ever since then.
Fair enough. So is there any particular driver that stood out for you? You got Daniel Ricciardo, who I guess took a very similar path in moving to the UK quite early on in his career. Any particular driver that would you call your inspiration, or was it just the sport on a whole?
I think Daniel, obviously, because as you said, very similar and just a lot more relatable, I guess you could say, in a lot of ways for me, from where I come from. And being such a good driver in this time at a top level, so I think Daniel's definitely been a leader for a lot of young Australian drivers and an inspiration in that way. But I think there's a lot of great drivers. Obviously, Hamilton's an extremely good driver. Alonso, as well, and people like Prost and Senna. If you see what they do and how they led the sport at the time and what they've kind of done in terms of leading into the modern era, I think there's a lot of things now that drivers do thanks to those guys pushing each other so hard and performing at a high level.
For sure. So, yeah, like I said, you moved from Australia to the UK. Would you have called that the biggest challenge for you, or has there been something that's even more of a challenge as you've kind of stepped up through the ranks in motorsport?
It's hard to say. I say in hindsight. I think there's been, you have tough moments all the time when you're racing, because it's a fact that most of the time you're not going to be the fastest guy out there, as much as we'd like that to be the case. And I think for a lot of the drivers, if you're not first, then, that's quite often not good enough, is it? So you live in that kind of pressured scenario, and everyone's always comparing against each other and making a big deal out of it. It was a big thing for me moving to the UK, but I was prepared for it because I knew it was coming for a little while, and it was obviously very difficult for my family. I think more so than me coming to the UK, but I'd say I had some really tough moments last year just racing. I think just almost reality of kind of, you're racing here now. This is serious. There's not really any going back. And so I think the bad moments when I was racing in F4 last year, they were probably some of my toughest. But I think, generally towards the end of the season, things got better, and I got a lot stronger as a driver and as a person.
Fab. And that's really good to hear as well. What you had to do to try and get over those tough moments? Because every driver's going to hit those ruts in their career where they're going to find a challenge or struggle in a race. How do you kind of prepare yourself mentally to stay in the zone and keep pushing forward with those sort of things?
Yeah, well, I think a big thing is having the right people around you, knowing when your own weaknesses and kind of knowing I can't do this all by myself. And a lot of drivers have a huge amount of people working behind them that you've never heard of or seen. So I think even people always go, it's a very individual kind of sport from what you see out from the outwards perspective. But I think there's a lot of people behind every driver giving their all and supporting them. So I'm really lucky to have my family and just a lot of people I've met in such a short time in the UK who have been willing to just give me advice and basically support me in tougher times and things like that.
That's fantastic. So you're in their F4 weekend, and I think with F4 it's a spec series, so the setup of the car is really, really important. Is that's the the view that an outsider takes from it? Is that right, or is there something that's even more important than obviously the driver plays a pretty good part? But go on.
Yeah, the cars are the same in terms of every single part is usually, unless the team's doing something pretty dodgy, legally is completely the same. No, but last year I think there was pretty much absolute parity on that front. I have to say, which is good, obviously. But I think what people underestimate a lot in spec series is the teams, the difference in teams. I think a lot of people think, it's not like F1 where the cars are different. Yeah, that's true. But it makes a huge difference what team you're with, even at a junior level. Obviously, it's not like Formula One where, if you put a really good driver in a bad team in a junior single-seater series, they'll still shine, I feel, or a team that's struggling. I don't think that's obviously almost impossible in F1. No matter who you put in a Williams, they're not going to win a race. But I think you can see that in the single-seater series just because the time gap's a lot smaller. But definitely, there's better teams. Say, look at Prema in FIA F3. They've been completely dominant for a whole host of reasons. I'm sure there's lots of different things in terms of, the reliability of a car quite often comes down to how a team manages parts and the diligence of the mechanics and things like that. And you've got engineers who set up the car for different track conditions and have knowledge of just the track and the car and know how to make changes. And then you've obviously got like tyre choices and things like that in changeable conditions. There's a lot of things in a team, and just the whole management. Say if one car breaks down, how a team manages the people working on that car, but then also getting the other cars ready for the next few races. So I think it's, like I said, with the driver, in the same, there's a huge amount of people working behind the scenes, and I think a big part of single-seater racing, especially if you look at something like F2, is the team and what team you drive for.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that. So, kind of sticking with F4 and think about the paddock situation now. So, I've done a bit of work with Formula Student, and that's also student-led a series, and it's quite a weird paddock feeling because unlike Formula One, where it's everyone for themselves. We had a suspension failure last year, and you had the other teams go out saying, "Oh, look, we've got some spare parts here. Take some spare parts."
Yeah.
If you look at Formula One, you're never going to see, Mercedes going to Ferrari and saying, "Hey, you've lost your front wing. Here, have one of ours." You're not going to see that. It's kind of the other end of the spectrum. Those are obviously the two extremes. With something like F4 or F3, where does that sit? Is there still kind of that, I guess, almost selfishness between the teams, and just we've got it's everyone for themselves? Or
I have to say, what you described there is I can see that. That reminds me of a lot of situations in go-karts, but obviously where I come from, go-karts isn't as... I'm not sure how much go-karting you've seen in the UK, but it's pretty serious in terms of the teams and the outfits here. But where I come from, generally it's people running their own karts, and yes, there's teams, but it's a bit more... Even when it's really competitive, I think it's a bit more of a friendly atmosphere, and so people willing to do stuff like that, lending parts or lending an engine if something goes wrong. I do feel like that does happen a little bit in F4 or F3, but it's kind of it's the most desperate of scenarios, if you know what I mean. But they do help each other out. So like last year, our team didn't. I think something was wrong with our beacon that we used to pick up lap times, and one of the other teams helped us out. So there's definitely still, I think, like you said, it's a more... because there's less money and probably less attention on the series, there's a bit more of a kinder atmosphere and a bit more camaraderie. I think, like you say, it's kind of between the two. But at the end of the day, single-seater teams, especially in the bigger series, they are out. It's a competitive environment. They're beating one another. They're competing against each other. The money they get for next year is probably decided on how well they perform this year. So for them, it's important that they perform as well as possible when they beat the other teams.
For sure. That's really interesting. Thanks very much for that. So, I guess you've raced against quite a lot of talent over your racing career. Are there any drivers that kind of stand out? Any of your biggest competitors? Would you say?
Oh yeah, I've been really, really fortunate in terms of people, because I got to race quite a few Australians as well as when I was racing there. Now in the UK. We'll see. This year's supposed to be quite a strong grid in British F3, so we'll see how that goes. And I'm facing quite a few people from last year, but there were some drivers in Australia who I thought were quite good, like Nathan Hearn, who raced over there. He was quite good in a Formula Ford, but he's jumped into the Trans Am series, which is a bit like a mix between a supercar and a NASCAR. That's getting quite big in Australia, and he's done really well on that. There's Hunter McElrea, who was the series champion. He came second in USF 2000 last year. So he's quite a good driver as well. He's really fast, especially if he gets his act together. Jaden Ojeda, who I did some work with in Australia, he's competing in the Super 2 this year, which is the second tier of V8 supercars. Last year I raced quite a few good drivers. All the guys at the front pretty much were good. It's hard to say. I say this a lot, but I think the top 8 guys, 8 to 10 drivers last year were very, very close, especially in testing. But then you had like probably 4 or 5, sometimes to do with the team or just on race day, they performed a bit better. So obviously Zane did a really good job and he won the series, and he's competing in Euroformula this year. Louis Foster I'll be racing against this year. He's a good driver. And again, he was really dominant when he had a good weekend. So I think he's obviously quite a good driver. And then you've got Sebastian Alvarez, who I don't think will be competing in British F3 just because of where he has gone. And Luke Browning was quite impressive in considering he was driving for Richardson, and he's doing British F4 again. So I've been really, like I say, I think I've just been lucky. I've come up against a lot of good drivers, but again, it's hard to say because a lot of these drivers, especially on an F4 grid, they don't really have, it's not like F2 where they've come in and they're like a champion from this series and a champion from this series and they all just come together. It's not really like that. It's all these people who are relative unknowns and they're still progressing at such a rate that you don't really know what the drivers are going to be like next year. So I think like a lot of the people who were really good last year if they don't step up this year, all of a sudden they're not considered hot prospects anymore, and it's really hard to say. And I think motorsport is a sport that we've seen forgets quickly. If you look at someone like Vettel, for example, things change really fast, and you're only as good as your last race.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you've mentioned there's so much talent, and that kind of leads on to my next question. At this level, it's obviously so difficult to keep that momentum going, keep that and keep pushing up through the series. How do you kind of, or what gets you noticed? So what's the best way to kind of get noticed in that motorsport sense? Is it just a matter of luck and just being at the right place at the right time, or what on that one?
There's no exact criteria. I think a lot of drivers will say that. I think what everyone knows is that if you want an F1 seat, then it's timing, massive timing in terms of, you look at Nick de Vries didn't get his F1 seat despite winning the championship, but again, because he won in his third year, he kind of got pushed back a bit. So that I guess that makes sense in a way. But you look at the year before, and you had 4 rookies on the grid, 3 or 4 rookies. So it's just, I think on that sense, timing's really important. But in the junior categories, getting noticed, say the people that get picked up are the junior teams, so your Red Bull and your Renault and your Ferraris. It's a whole mix of things. It's contacts, like who you know and who's talking to these people. I'm sure for some of the drivers, it's tests. They do really promising tests, and the team thinks, wow, you're good. Or even these days, simulator sessions. They might even think you're really good on a simulator. And these teams, a big part of being the junior drivers is you do a lot of sim work, possibly to help the F1 team. Not necessarily, because they usually have people who are professional paid sim drivers, like Kvyat was for Ferrari. And you got lots of ex-F1 drivers doing stuff like that. So there's lots of different ways that the teams can pick up. But I think obviously results is a big thing as well. Results in a series. If you're a champion of a series, I think people obviously going to be a bit more likely to support you. So like, there's no exact science to it, but there's a lot of things, and there's social media following as well, which I guess is becoming more important these days. But it's hard to say. I think if you just know the right people and you're in the place at the right time, and you show that you're hardworking and that you've got something, and you've got something unique, I think that those drivers who prove that kind of thing will get a drive.
Fantastic. So before we do look at your future and what the plans are for you next, just I guess it's a question you've heard a lot, but if you could give any advice to someone that's, say, starting out in karts now or starting out in their racing career now, what advice would that be?
I would have to say it's obviously a bit broad, because I think it's very hard these days, especially like I was saying, most of the kids in Europe are starting at 5, 6 or 7 in go-karts. So if you're much older than that, there's no reason why you couldn't be a racing driver, but F1, some of the teams in that it can be quite hard. But I think for anyone who's, 12, 13, you can still, that dream's still there 100%, or even 14, 15, because that's when you get into a car, really. I would say that it's not stupid to aim for F1. I think it's extremely unlikely, and as long as you understand that, I think there's no reason why you shouldn't aim for Formula 1 and give it your all. But I think the great thing about motorsport, especially in Europe and the UK, is there's a huge amount of opportunities that they're different. They're not as simple as, you get paid a contract for a Formula 1 team, but there's plenty of opportunities with GT teams and touring car teams, or working as a part-time driver coach, or maybe a gentleman driver pays you to be their teammate. But I think there's a huge amount of avenues, especially after this year, where you can achieve a career in motorsport. And as long as you understand that it's a tough sport and it's not fair most of the time, I think you can achieve a lot of great things.
That's really interesting. So let's talk about you now and talk about your, I guess, as we touched on earlier, you're racing in BRDC British Formula 3 this year.
Yeah.
What's your, I guess, plans for that? Was your first year in that category? Are you going to go out all guns blazing? I imagine you're going to want to win. You're a racing driver. But Are there any, what At the end of the season, what would you consider a successful season?
My personal goal was, it's a bit hard to say because we don't really know until qualifying or pre-practice on that first weekend where we're going to stand. Everyone likes to think they're competitive before that, but you never know. And it can be pretty harsh sometimes. So I'm going to, be open-minded about it all. But my basic goal for myself was just do better than last year. So I want to get more wins, more poles, more podiums, more fast laps than last year. Just kind of aim for that stuff. Just try and do my best and try and achieve that goal. Higher place in the championship, just things like that, which I think would be a good step considering I'm stepping up a series. So if I can improve on what I did last year, I think that would be quite good.
Fantastic. And I guess a little bit of fun just to end off. You touched on, your goal is to get to Formula One. And if you could race for any team or race against any driver, what would that be? It doesn't have to be the current grid, could be in any in any of the sports history. If you could race against one driver for one team, what would that be?
So do I pick a driver in that? So do I pick a teammate for me, or how does that work?
So pick any team that you want to race with, past or present, and then any driver you would have wanted to race against, past or present. Doesn't have to have been for the same team.
That I want to race in. Oh, okay.
How can I put you on the spot here?
No. I think Ferrari's a bad answer, isn't it, at the moment? But
as long as you can deal with the spin here.
I'd really like to. Maybe I'm just being too optimistic. I'd like to drive for like a Williams that is competitive. I think that would be just really nice. I think I've kind of got a bit of a soft spot for them now. And I think George Russell's brilliant, and I'd like to see him do well.
Yeah.
And if I had to race against another driver, I think Alonso. That'd be so much fun.
Good answer.
I think to race against somebody, I wouldn't mind losing, to be honest. I'm not so. Yeah, I think he's brilliant. I'm super excited to see him back. I was so happy when he signed, or I heard rumours that pretty much confirmed it. So, I think that's going to be great. I think anyone who's a fan of the sport should be excited to see him back, because Formula One's all about seeing the best drivers in the world, and I think you can safely say he's probably in the top 5 drivers at the moment. So it'll be great to see him back in an F1 car.
Fantastic. Bart, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on the show. First drive on the show, so thanks so much again for coming on. If you want to watch Bart on, racing in the Formula 3 Championship this year, the British Formula 3 Championship, that does start on the 1st and 2nd of August at Oulton Park, if I'm right.
Yeah, you're right.
Cool, I've got that one right. Cool. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the weekend on Saturday and Sunday as well. Cool. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and of course subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next one.